And, for us as guys, when it gets to football season, if you are a football fan, your time can be monopolized a little bit by watching football, and it's hard to make time for the habits and the stuff that you're trying to build up, so you can work towards the goals that you've set for yourself if you have goals. But I will always do it every season.
Oh, for sure.
Always. There's nothing better than waking up on a crisp fall morning, throwing on College Game Day in the background, drinking a cup of coffee, and then just watching nothing but football all day.
Yeah. Not making any plans. The only plans I'm making are watching football somewhere.
Yeah. Either at home or with other people.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, can't wait for that. But speaking of habits, we did want to use this podcast to talk about what are some of the habits and practices that we can put in our lives to make us a healthy man, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. What are some of the things we can do to take steps forward in our health? And that, again, when we talk about health, it's encompassing everything, right? Like the company I previously worked at talked a lot about, had this like pyramid, and it was like mind, body, spirit. And they just talked about how all three are connected, and they shouldn't be, if you have them out of whack, it's almost like a three-legged stool, right? If you don't have one of them, like that stool's not going to be super stable. And there's going to be some things that feel off, that feel wobbly. Or if one's shorter than the other two, same thing. So it's really important to have habits and practices that hit all three areas, that can increase your health in those three areas. So I think we'll kind of talk through it in that way. So you kind of have yours broken up in that kind of format. So if you want to start, you can.
Yeah, I got mine broken down in like fitness, or I guess physical, spiritual, mental. For me, my headline for this is a quote I heard from a pastor, and it was a sermon about anxiety and depression. And the quote he says is that a doctor cannot just say it's medical, and a pastor cannot just say it's spiritual. I think that's so good, because it's both, right? And reading and praying, I'll get that later on this podcast. I think that's crucial, and that's not maybe it's a need. But for me personally, how I handle, because I struggle with anxiety on a day-to-day basis, and how I struggle with anxiety is through physical fitness. So I think that walking is really good, and to start, because with fitness, you can't just go straight into lifting 300 pounds. You got to gradual get into that. So, but however, I think that getting a deep sweat in and lifting weights is so good. And for multiple reasons. One, so like if you got something going on, you're stressed and you're working out, you got to be counting those reps, because if you're not counting the reps, you're either not getting enough or you're doing too much. And also same thing with sets. You got to know what set you're on as well. And the reason why I think lifting weights are good, because you don't want to drop them on your toes, so you got to be focused on that. And then like yesterday, I was doing deadlifts, and if I'm doing deadlifts, I have to make sure that my form is correct. I can't be bent over too much, or I'm going to like strain my back. I have to make sure that my back is straight up when I'm doing that, so I don't hurt myself. So, and I also have like heavy metal music on. I don't know what it's saying. I make sure it's not like demonic, but I do that for like more like white noise. So I have music going. I'm having to make sure I'm counting my reps. I make sure I'm counting my sets, making sure I'm not dropping the weight. I'm making sure I'm having the right form. I don't have time to think about what I'm stressed about. I can't do that. If I'm thinking about what I'm stressed about, my workout's going to be bad and I'm going to hurt myself, right? So just with all of those aspects of it, I'm able to clear my mind with that. I think guys do that a lot better than girls, clearing their mind. That's the best gift God gave us. But sometimes I can't do that. So I have to go and work out with that. And I would take it even a step further, is that when people have anxiety, it leads to panic attacks. And panic attacks, cause their breath like to be uncontrolled and the heart rate to go up. Well, when you're working out, those two things happen. You know, when you're working out, your breath starts breathing heavy and your heart rate starts going faster. So if you know how to control that, because you have to control that in your workout or you're going to pass out. So if you can learn how to control that in your workout, when that happens with mental health and what happens when you have a panic attack, you're able to, oh, wait, this happens when I'm working out. So I know how to handle this and I can slow my breath down, slow my heart rate down because I do
Mm-hmm.
that when I'm working out.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like, I think working out for me, my number one thing. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I didn't really like rank these.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, that was one of the first things I wrote down was yeah. And there's plenty of types of exercise. It's not that you have to lift weights. You
Oh,
can
yeah. That's just me personally. Yeah.
yeah, same here. Like I prefer lifting weights, like
Yeah.
running. I
But even
would
body weight too is a good
oh
thing too.
yeah. Yeah. I can't do running though. That's
So running
just
sucks. No, I hate running.
yeah. But I walking for me though has been one of the most life-changing habits
Mm.
um that I've done in the past, 2 years or so.
Mm-hmm.
And I only walk like 30 to 35 minutes a day.
Like with this
You
heat
know,
now, that's a lot.
yeah, yeah, and I don't take my phone, I don't take
Mm.
headphones.
Oh, really?
I walk and I pray and I think.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
And um so that's, it's overlapping a couple of the habits that we're talking
Yeah.
about, but just giving yourself space to where you're not distracted to death and
Yeah.
entertained to death and you can actually think about the stuff going on in your life, the people in your life, um, the creator of
Mm-hmm.
you and everything that you're looking at, and you can just spend time like talking with God and thinking about just what's going on. It gives you time to like process what's going on around you and like how you
Yeah.
feel about everything, and like, if something's making you really anxious or stressed out, you have time to think through it and think about how to problem solve, and you can, take that to the Lord, and it feels like a weight, lifted off when you do that. Um, so yeah, I'm not going to say much more about lifting weights and working out because I think you hit the nail on the head. But I would highly, highly recommend taking some space to walk. And if you have a family, like do it with the family. Go walk
Yeah.
with your kids. Go walk with your spouse.
Yeah.
But if it's just you, like just go walk. And it doesn't have to be like you don't have to find some trail in the woods, or
Mm-hmm.
like if you want to do that, that's perfect. But like I work on a busy highway, and there's a sidewalk that goes from the church I work at all the way down to like this shopping restaurant center village thing. So I just walk there and back, and there's noise going on, but I'm not distracted by like music or a podcast or headphones. Like I have
Yeah.
the space to think.
And there's
So yeah.
and like there's no excuse to not do that because we can binge watch a Netflix series, you
Oh
know.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
during that, so we have time in our day. We are like I had to set a limit on my phone for social media, you know, because I realized I was on it too much. But I mean, even with that limit, I don't need to be on that. I can be walking or I can be
Yep.
doing something, and you can just go to like Chat GPT and say, "Hey, I only have 30 minutes each day. What can I do to help me be more physically fit?"
Yep.
And like, or you go YouTube. Like we have so many resources to figure that out that there's no excuse not to do something like that.
Yeah. Listen to these statistics. I was working on a presentation this week and came
You came
across
with
this.
facts, man.
Yeah. So the average American spends 705 hours on social media every year.
Whoa.
That's a lot of hours.
Yeah.
And the average American also spends 2,737.5 hours watching TV every year.
Mm.
So we say we don't have time to
We
do
have
these
so much
things.
time.
We have all the time in the world. We're just distracting ourselves to death.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and there's a book I would highly recommend to anyone. It's called Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, John Mark Comer.
Got a plug
Um,
going on.
and that's where I got those statistics from. But he was talking about like how many books you could read in a year, and it would take like a fraction of that time that we're spending on social
Oh
media
yeah.
and TV. And there's just so much good you can do if you focus on what really matters and stop letting yourself, because the reality is they're selling your attention.
Mm-hmm.
They're selling your attention. And your what you consume and what you give your attention to is who you're going to become. And you're not getting to choose what your attention's giving to. There's an algorithm that's choosing it for you. And so it's scary. But
Dang, that's
we have
deep.
to have habits and practices that like prevent us from giving our attention to the wrong things. We have to give our
Yeah.
attention to the right things, and that takes discipline and it takes intentionality, it takes accountability, which I know, we'll hit on that later. But
Well, and I want to pause real quick and go what you're saying is if you're struggling with depression or anxiety, the last thing you need to be on is social media or watching
yeah,
TV,
yeah,
because that's the, and I'll get to that later on. So like you definitely need to stop doing that and go work out. And I know if you're someone like listening to this right now and you're like, man, I'm depressed. And if you're depressed, you don't have motivation to do anything, right?
yeah,
A simple walk around your house, around like inside your house, doing something. Just start small habits that will create that. And if you're an anxious person, and let's say you're anxious going into work, try to like work out before work, or if you want to clear your head after work, try to like walk or work out after work. To try to help that like aspects. And because I promise you, it's going to like with working out, you're not going to like go in the mirror and like, oh my gosh, I am so jacked the first day, right?
yeah,
It's going
hmm
to take time, but you need to be committed to that if you
yeah,
want to help your mental health.
yeah. Which that goes for all of these habits and
Exactly. Oh, yeah.
practices we
Right. Right.
talk about. Um, but I think what's important is like, even if you don't struggle with anxiety and depression,
Right.
the reality is like God has created each of us as men with a purpose
Mm-hmm.
to embody who he is, his character, and represent him to the world and to co-rule with him
Mm-hmm.
over his creation, to like take the world he created and with him just like bring it along and make it better. And in that process, like making his goodness and love and generosity evident through the way that we do that. And so regardless of if you have a like mental health issue or something, you've been created for a purpose, and it's a high calling and it's a tall task. And you can let, if the enemy can't get you to denounce your faith, he'll just distract you to death so you're not effective, so that you're not doing what you're called to or the purpose God's given you. And so, yeah, it's just as simple as like, we're not saying you got to completely cut social media out or you can
Right.
never
Right.
watch TV again. I mean,
Right.
we opened up talking about how much we're going to watch football this fall,
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
But what we're saying is like, just invest in yourself. There's no better investment than giving time to invest in you being who you're created to be and who God's called you to be. And all it takes is getting 1% better each and every day. If you get 1% better and you look at the end of the year, you're going to be blown away by how much you've grown in just a short span of time, just by a small fraction of a change in your life.
Yeah, that's
And
not a lot. 1%.
no. And so, like, we're going to talk about a lot of habits and practices today, but recognize that Johnny and I have developed these over a long period of time, and we're not always perfect at it. We don't always do all of them. Um, it's come with a lot of time and a lot of trial and error. So, like, if you're listening to this podcast and you feel like you're an undisciplined person, you're very distracted, you feel like you don't have time for anything, I would encourage you, just if one habit stands out to you, start with that. Just start with a small change, and then you can build off of that. So yeah, sorry for that
No, I love that
sidebar
because
soapbox, but
every habit that I want to say, I'm not perfect on.
mhm,
Like there's some days that I don't do them, even though I should.
mhm,
I just from you're saying, there's our experience that we know that these are the habits that we need to live a healthy life,
yep,
like
yep,
mentally, physically, and spiritually. These are habits that we know that we need. We're not perfect on them, so don't think that we're like these experts.
yep,
This whole podcast is about our trial and error, and we're like, hey,
mhm,
instead of you going through that trial and error, let's just tell you the roads
yep,
to don't go down and the roads to do go down.
yep, mhm, yep.
For sure.
Yeah, yeah. So I think, getting back into some of the habits, I would say like I feel like a lot of men, especially young men, and this was me for a long time, are just like coasting through life, letting life come to them. Not There's not a whole lot of intentionality or forethought or um, thinking about who you want to become 10, 15, 20 years down the road. We just kind of go with the flow. And one of my favorite quotes used to be when Johnny Depp in Pirates of the Caribbean does this crazy like getaway escape thing, and they're like, "Do you think he like plans all this stuff out, or just makes it up as he goes along?" And for the longest time, that's how I lived my life. Like I was just making it up as I went along.
Right.
And I know different personalities. Like there's people that are more planners, and then there's not. So like I'm on the side that's not. But my point is one of my habits and practices that I think you should do is first you need to get clear on what your purpose is, what you feel like you're on this earth for. Like, why are you here? Ask that question. And you may not get an answer right away. That may be a long process for you to figure that out. And you look into like, all right, what are the things I enjoy most? What are the things I think I'm good at? Um, what are the experiences I've had, and what have I learned from those? And I could go into more about that, but then figure out what your passion is. Like, what is it that motivates you to get out of bed every day? Is it people in your life? Is it the work that you're doing, or like the specific tasks of your day to day that motivate you and get you out of bed? Is it the purpose behind what you're doing? Is it like you're doing something for a greater cause, and like that's what gets you out of bed in the morning? Or is it that you just want to be the best? Is that what drives you? That you want to be the best? And if you can figure that out, that also helps a ton. And then if you get really clear on what's important to you, like what are your values? What do you value the most? Rank those, and that'll tell you where you need to spend your time. Once you get those three things, clear, and you can communicate it, then you can start to really map out how you want to spend your time, and you can get your priorities straight. And then following that, once you get those things in place, I think another habit that's very important is goal setting. So often we just go out there and we're just like just chipping away at the grindstone every day, and we don't think forward of like where we want to go. Um, and you and I did this practice not that long ago, where we wrote out our obituary, right? Thinking
Yeah,
about
it's
like
dark.
what do we want to be remembered for? What a At the end of our life, what do we want people to say about us? And it helps you. It gives you a trajectory. So then you can set smaller goals on the way there that help get you there. Um, so those are big ones for me. I would say that's more on like the mind part of things, like getting your mind right. Um, and that helps tremendously with mental health too, because a lot of times with depression, you just feel like you're not working towards anything, or you're not motivated. It's hard for you to do tasks. So if you can work on some of those things, that can really help. And that was
Yeah.
my experience. That was my experience.
No,
Like
I think it's yeah, great.
when I was dealing with depression, getting clear on those things helped me tremendously,
Yeah.
tremendously.
Well, and I think like, and not to be sexist by any means, but I think that's just how guys operate. Like
Mm-hmm.
when we hang out with our wives, like as like the like four of us, Tucker and I are just like, all right, let's just go along with the flow, and the girls have
Yep.
a list of every single
Yep.
thing that we're going to do, and it's helpful because we do need that, at some points. However, just because that's how guys are does not mean that's how guys need to stay. So like for me, like when I'm at work and I get stressed by the overwhelming stuff at work,
Mm-hmm.
having goals and tasks, okay, like I mean you can just like small goals, like goals for the day, like I want to get
Mm-hmm.
this accomplished today so I can like mark it off, check it off.
Yep.
I mean that will
It's
just
huge.
start taking down my anxiety and stress. But then yeah, with the obituary thing, I was so creeped out I want when you wanted to do that. And I was like, heck no. And I think I even told Claire, and Claire was like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
But when I actually did it, I was like, okay, wow, no, like this shows like what I want, what I think is most important, without even me thinking that, just
Yeah.
right here, like you unconsciously think about what's the most important thing in your life,
Yeah.
and then all these small things, you're like, okay, well, I don't need to be stressing, I don't need to be worrying, I don't need to be focusing on these tasks if this is not what I want my end goal to be.
Yeah.
But you need to have like long term and short terms. That's why like you need to have
Yeah.
day to day goals, long term goals, year goals, 5 year goals, like, and it sounds like a lot, but it is so helpful, and
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
gives you direction if you feel like you don't have direction, and it
Yeah.
also will can help if you set realistic expectations on these goals. It can help with your anxiety. Now, if you set unrealistic, then you're going to go to spiral. But
Yeah.
realistic expectations on these goals.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, with the whole purpose, passion, and values thing,
Mm-hmm.
like, I also want to say those can change too in different seasons of life.
Right.
Like, you could think your passion is one thing because you're in this season of life. And then later on, you could be like, well, I actually think the why behind what I do motivates me more than the
Right.
people that are involved in what I do. So it just, it's good to revisit these things often too. It's not like a
Right.
one and done
That's a good point.
type of thing. So yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
And for me, I think for like a why for me, because like Tucker and I are both believers. So I have small whys, like I want to be a good husband, declare, I want to be a good teacher, I want to help the students out. But my above all why is because of the Lord. And so my foundation is reading and praying for me. And I think that a lot of people would say that they have a really good prayer life. But if we're honest, we don't read the Bible as much as we should. And if like Tucker and I went to go hang out and I talked the entire time and Tucker never talked once, there's no conversation. There's not a relationship there. Right. But that's how we sometimes treat the Lord, is that we talk and talk and talk, but we never listen. And one way that he talks back to us is through his word. And so that's one way to help out with our spiritual health, is not just praying. Like, yes, we live in the South, so we pray for every meal. Christians or not Christians, they do that, right?
mhm.
But we also need to read the Bible and take time and be disciplined with that and reading the Bible. And I can take that from personal experience. Like a month ago or something, I was stressed out about a certain topic. Tucker's first question he asked was, "What are you reading?" He didn't ask if I was reading. He asked, "What are you reading?" And, I've been a Christian for a long time. I could have easily said, "I'm reading James and I'm learning how to deal with sin," you know. But I told him, I said, "Honestly, man, I'm not. I'm not reading at all." And he said, "All right, well, I'll text you tomorrow to make sure, let's read." And he did. And I'll get to accountability partners later on in this podcast. But I'm saying that to say is how Tucker knew the importance. The foundation is reading, right? That's where it all comes back to that, because I need to get to the source of that. So that's why I think reading is one of the biggest foundations for me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Those both of those things are on my list as well.
Yeah.
And I think, even if let's say you're listening to this podcast, you're not from the South, you're not a Christian, but you
Right.
listen to this because, you like the topic of manhood and being there for each other. I'll just say, like, whether you're a Christian or not, I think reading the Bible is extremely beneficial for you. Um, Jesus is one of the few historical figures that, like, almost all world religions recognize as a positive person in history. Now they disagree about a lot of other things, but
Yeah, they don't disagree. Like, they definitely disagree with him, but they see him as a
yeah,
positive teacher.
but a lot of like what people are hoping for in humanity and hoping for in the world, we see in Jesus. Um, and so, even if you're out there and you're maybe you're not spiritual at all, or maybe you're, in a different religion, and I still think reading the Bible can be beneficial. Um, and really I think prayer, God works in all of us. when we take time to just slow down and think. And too often we're robbing ourselves of that time. And so um, yeah, I just wanted to say, obviously Johnny and I are Christians, but I think these habits still apply even if you're not. And I still think they can help you become a healthier man. Um, but yeah, that was on my list too. And I also think, there's one habit too that I think would fit into the spiritual category, although it could just be mental too. But for me, it's spiritual, and that's gratitude. I had no idea how important gratitude was until I found myself struggling with depression. Um, but man, taking time every day to think about what's good in my life. What is there that I can be thankful for? What are the positives? What's going right? That can be just a game changer in helping you shift your mindset from thinking everything's going wrong, thinking
Right.
always being down all the time. Like just a simple habit of writing every morning, get out a journal, write down 3 things that you're grateful for every morning. And like take time to think about them too. Like try and like visualize what it is you're saying you're thankful for. And it'll change your whole day. It will.
Mhm.
And gratitude will also build up this resilience in you to where when things go wrong or things that normally would stress you out or make you sad or make you angry, like gratitude can like build you up and give you thicker skin to where those things don't impact and penetrate you and hurt you as much. Because it helps you focus on the silver lining, like
Mhm.
what's going right, what's good. And I just think that's a crucial habit.
No, I think that is spiritual too, right? Because if it, like as a Christian, you're going to be thankful for the Lord, thankful for salvation, thankful for Him giving breath into your lungs. And there are so many verses about gratitude.
Mm,
And in Ephesians, it talks about the word being a sword, right? And and the armor of God is comparing to the Roman soldiers' armor. So the sword. So the Roman soldiers, they knew how to use their sword. They had it memorized on their skills on how they can use it to attack their opponent, right? They
mm,
they they had it drilled into their brain how to use it, what it was, and the reason why it's called a sword is because we need the word during times of our lives, like battles. So we can need to memorize this word. So when you're struggling with depression, maybe memorize it. Like you can like think about things you're thankful for, which I think is a really good tactic because if you're driving and you look at a car accident, you're gonna start drifting towards it, right? So you need to start looking at things like that you're thankful for, so you can either write things down you're thankful for or memorize scripture that you're thankful for. If you have anxiety, you can start memorizing scripture to help fight against that so that when that time happens, you can just repeat that in your head. Because it's a sword. Like it's not just going to be a cliche thing you're saying. Like it is a weapon that you can use and the fight off temptation, to fight off anxiety, to fight off depression. So I highly recommend writing things down and even go a step further of memorizing scripture during that time as well.
no, no. Yeah. There's another cool practice I learned about where it just helps with your mental toughness of um, the reality is biologically speaking, 80% of our thoughts are negative, and it's tied to, our ancestors were living in a survivor, hunter gatherer, mode. So their brains were always like looking out for
Right.
the threats and assessing the threats. So our brains that's carried on even though we don't live in that world anymore. Like
Mhm.
we're not worried about a saber-toothed tiger jumping out of some tall grass and mauling us to death, right?
Right.
Some parts of the world they still are in that, but in America we're not in that. And so we have to learn and kind of like retrain our brain to not always be thinking of the negative or looking out for the threat. And that's a lot of what anxiety is it is your mind is like preparing you for all that may go wrong and then it causes this like stress and like you feeling like, oh gosh, this is gonna happen, this is gonna happen. But in reality, it's just like pictures of what could go wrong flashing in front of your mind. So one of the things I found helpful that you can do if you find yourself doing that often is like you have a negative thought, write it down. Like if you have a thought of I'm not good enough, write it down. And then think of what the positive of that would be. Like what do you want instead? Okay, so if I'm thinking I'm not good enough, I want to think I am good enough. Like I am I am power or whatever the opposite to that would be. You write that under it and then you mark out the top negative thought. And this is something you can do in a journal and track it, for a week or so. And you'll start to like see your mind just doing it automatically. Like it'll become a habit to where you're reversing these negative thoughts with what you want instead.
Yeah,
Um,
I like that. My old boss, he used to joke. It was a joke, but I mean, it was a little serious. He always told me that I was always so negative, and I told him, I said, "Well, it's good being negative because I said our ancestors. I said someone who is so positive all the time, if they were in like the Stone Age and walked through that tall grass, they're gonna get killed by a saber-toothed tiger or a snake. But
yeah,
someone who's negative is going to think maybe I should go around it at first. So being negative helps you survive. That was a way that I like would just say it was okay for being a. But no, you're
yeah,
like you're so right. Like if you keep focusing on that, that's who you're going to become.
yeah,
Right? And I like that visual aspect of no, that's not who I am. This is who I am instead.
yeah.
Right. So
And
what you focus on is who you're going to become.
And again, this is where scripture can be so helpful, right? Because sometimes we think things about ourselves that God clearly says in scripture, like, this is not who you are.
Right.
Like, if you think, I don't have a purpose here, or like, I don't belong here. Well,
Right.
God clearly has told you that He's created you for a purpose. And it's like, it's a legit, like, honoring purpose. Like, you've been called to
Amen.
something great.
Mhm.
And so a lot of times scripture can help with that. Or like if you think like if you're super insecure about the way you look, like, well, God's told you you're fearfully and wonderfully made,
Mhm.
and like you've been created in His image. That's some dignity to that. And so yeah, it's a great thing. And I don't. Did you see Inside Out too?
I've not. Only heard good things about it though.
Yeah, I highly recommend it because they introduced anxiety in this one, and
Right.
it just helps you understand that like anxiety has a role to play, but it too often anxiety controls who we are,
Oh, for sure.
or who we're supposed to be, and that's not its place. And so we have to learn to train our brains to put anxiety and those negative thoughts in its place,
Mhm.
um, and let it do the good things, but also realize that it's not supposed to run the show.
Yeah.
And too often we let it do that. So yeah, that there's a plug for Inside Out too.
You're just
Um,
doing a ton of plugs today, man.
yeah, just giving the people what they want, the
I hear you.
resources they want.
I hear you.
Yeah, so I think, along with a lot of what we talked about, one key, one key habit that I'm trying to get better at and trying to get more structure to in my life is taking time to rest. Um,
I'm so bad at that.
yeah, yeah, and I am too. And I don't mean just like having a lazy day where you watch TV or,
No,
you know, play
because there is
video
an excessive
games.
amount of rest too. That's
Right,
unhealthy.
right. I think so what I base my rest off of is a biblical practice called Sabbath. Um, so the Hebrews, Israelites in the Old Testament, they had this practice of Sabbath, and it was a 24-hour period once a week where they would cease from work, they would worship God, and just delight in who He is and in His creation. And so there was all these feasts tied to it, and they would go to the temple together, and they would eat meals together, and um, you know our world used to be back in like the 50s and 60s. America actually functioned with like a underlying, we're going to have a Sabbath. Like everything was closed on Sunday. You couldn't go anywhere, you couldn't get anything, you had to do all that ahead of time. And that was the same for the Israelites. Like they had to prepare everything so that they could have 24 hours of rest where they weren't working and weren't doing anything. And then just as our world is just hungry for more and more money and more productivity, we've moved away from that. And so now most companies or most like restaurants you think of or grocery stores, they're open 7 days of the week, long hours. And so we just kind of lost it being embedded. And so it's harder to do these days. And I've been bad about setting aside time for that. Now, obviously I have, I take Friday and Saturday as my days off because I work Sunday's a work day for me. Um, but I still find myself just filling those days with like doing other stuff or like,
Right.
so I'm trying to get more intentional about just making Haley and I both just having a 24-hour period where we slow down and we use that day to worship, to delight in who God is, to enjoy his creation, um, and to rest, just to cease from work, knowing that like none of my doing and trying is like that stuff will all be there when I go back to work. And God is faithful to provide and meet us, and he's given us everything we need. We don't need to constantly be striving and working to get more because in God we have enough. In Jesus we have enough. And so I'm trying to do a better job of that. And that helps tremendously with not feeling overwhelmed, with not feeling burnt out. If you can have that as a practice, like an intentional habit, um, you'll find yourself not doing that. And if you're like way up in a company, you're a CEO or a manager of a bunch of people, I'm sure you feel the weight of like just feeling like you always have to be checking emails, you always got to be on the phone, you always got to be working, but like just hear that it's okay. All those things, like just trust the Lord with those things. They're not all on your shoulders. Um, I think that's a key part of rest.
No, I saw this video that said at the end of the month, if you die at the end of the month, they will replace you at your job.
Yep.
And so you need to be working on your obituary more than your resume.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, gosh, that's so good. Now, Tucker and I are not saying be a slacker at work. You still need to
Yeah.
perform at
Yeah.
work.
Mm-hmm.
However, don't let it consume you in
Yeah.
that way.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I struggle with rest so much. And like for me, and you're about to roll your eyes when you hear this because I'm sure you've heard this so many times. And if anyone has ever like had a serious conversation with me, I love to throw this analogy in. And I'm an analogy guy, if you don't know already.
Mm-hmm.
But the analogy of the two wolves is my favorite story. See, there it is.
Yeah.
I tell it so many times because there's a good wolf and a bad wolf. The good wolf, or sorry, let's start with the bad wolf. The bad wolf is filled with depression, anxiety, drunkenness, lust, addiction, or angerness. The good wolf is filled with joy, peace, patience, kindness, and self-control. And the question you ask is, which wolf wins? And people will go back and forth, and the answer is the wolf you feed is the wolf that wins. And every day, these wolves are going to be hungry. So, like for me personally, if I'm giving like even some music, if I'm listening to like I love rap, country, rock and roll, punk rock, heavy metal, but sometimes that stuff can have a negative effect on me, and it can have I have to take a break from that, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm putting in bad stuff from there, and I'm feeding that bad wolf, then that bad wolf is going to be stronger, and the good wolf will have no food, and he's going to lose, right? So I'm not saying don't listen to rap, don't listen to country, but I'm saying like, do it at certain levels
Yeah.
because you don't want it to consume you. You don't want to feed so much, and where then the good wolf is weak. And the way you feed the good wolf is through reading the Bible. It's through these habits right here.
Mm-hmm.
So you gotta feed each wolf. And every morning they're going to be coming to you, and you gotta decide which dog bowl you're going to put into that day. And every day it's a constant fight every day of which one you're going to do for it in. And another way to feed that good wolf for me personally is with accountability partners and counselors. I think these two aspects get the worst rap ever. because for a counselor, I think people say, I don't need a counselor yet. My life isn't that bad. Well, to do a full circle right now is, let's say, the Georgia and Tennessee game. Georgia is not going to start having new plays in the middle of that game. They're not going to start practicing, new different skills in the middle of that game. They're practicing right now for that game in the fall. And that sounds common sense. Why would they make up new plays in the middle of that game? Why would they practice in the middle of that game? Sounds common sense. But we don't think that's common sense when it comes to counseling. We don't think that we think that we should wait until it gets bad and then start doing something about it. Right? If Georgia was losing, like it would never happen. But if Georgia was losing like 40 points to Tennessee, they're not going to start doing a new play that they've never done before because it's not going to get the best results for them. So with counseling is you're not going to it's not going to help you if you start counseling in the middle of it. Now, trust me, there are great counselors out there, and it will take time, and I believe in it. But you can prepare for that before that happens. Now, just because your life is going great does not mean that you don't need counseling. Does not mean that you don't need accountability in your life. Going back to the good wolf and bad wolf, because I think that mental health is not this linear thing where you go from point A and go all the way to point B. I think it has ups and downs to it. And I'm not saying to camp out in those valleys, right? Because you're going to have times where you're going to have maybe a panic attack, or you might get depressed again right now. But that's why you need those counselors and those accountability partners in your life. That when those valleys happen, you have someone to help you bring you back up.
Mm-hmm.
And it is something that even people who struggle with mental health still don't think that they need that.
Mm-hmm.
But that is one of the biggest things that people need in their life.
Yeah. Yeah. And with a lot of the habits we've talked today about, you need other people in those, like,
Yeah.
to help you determine what your purpose is, what your passion is. Like, you need to talk to other people and see what they see in you.
Right.
And because you may have blind spots, you may have things that you don't notice about yourself. So yeah, counseling is a great thing to do, and I'm glad that it doesn't have the stigma that it used to have anymore. And it's becoming, people are starting to see the value in it, so that's good.
Yeah.
But yeah, like we said earlier, hopefully this is helpful and just gives you an idea of some things you can start doing if you're not doing them already. And again, if none of these are a part of your habits or practices, like, just start with something small. Start with one easy win. It could be the gratitude thing where you're writing down 3 things you're thankful for.
Definitely start small.
Yeah, and just it'll give you the momentum you need to build off of that and add some more on as you go. But yeah, that wraps up the podcast for today. So you guys have our top 5 SEC predictions for the year, so you can hold us accountable for that once the season gets going. And we hope that you're out there spending the time making yourself a better man and doing that, and holding each other accountable for that as well. So go be a dog today.
And go be there for your dogs.